Thanks for having me on, Whitney. It's kind of hard to know where to start, but I guess I'll just start chronologically, not going back too far, but this recent rollout appears to have really started with a New York Times article from last year that basically was the first mainstream media article that I know of that actually had contained in it footage claiming to be from the US military photographing some kind of UFO, or as they now call them, UAP. I don't even know what the acronym actually.
I think it's unidentified aerial phenomena is what
Yeah.
UAP is supposed to be. Yeah.
So then, that article kind of made some buzz. It didn't it had, a lot of people were excited about it. A lot of people were weirded out by it. I was weirded out by it when I saw it. I remember watching the footage and thinking, now this is really odd that this would even come out of the New York Times. And then, I kind of forgot about it. And then about a year later, which was like, I think like 2.5 weeks ago from the time we were recording this, one of the most, esteemed news programs in the country, 60 Minutes, does an entire segment about it and presents it all very, very seriously. And in this segment, it was revealed that Christopher Mellon, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Pentagon, actually acknowledges and takes credit for being this sort of heroic whistleblower inside the Pentagon who wanted to get this stuff out there, and leaked these videos to the New York Times. And then we have Luis Elizondo, who's featured very, all over the 60 Minutes special. He's kind of he almost seems like some kind of UFO crank, conspiracy guy, but he was in the Pentagon, supposed to be this guy who was, really trying to rattle all the cages in the Pentagon and really tell people this is serious. We need to investigate this. And he was sort of laughed at and whatnot. And this is sort of how the story was presented. But I thought the most compelling thing, at least in the 60 Minutes special for me, and this is sort of, this is just my gut reaction to it, was that I think my gut reaction to it was that at least two of the people in the special, two of these Air Force pilots, were either telling the truth about what they saw, or they're extremely good actors, like Oscar quality actors. So I tend to believe their eyewitness accounts, but at the same time, Whitney, I'm very much in line with your thinking on what this rollout really is about, and it does seem to be sort of a roundabout way to push for some kind of increase in militarization of space. But what I find really interesting about this way this has been rolled out is it has the appearance of being some kind of patriotic insiders inside the state who are trying to rattle the cages in the government and really wake people up. And this is almost kind of like a populist narrative in a way. It's like, it's not, Joe Biden's not getting up there at the podium and saying we now admit there's UFOs and they're a threat or whatever. It's almost has this appearance, almost like the way the lab leak theory about Wuhan has sort of reemerged. It has this sort of false appearance of being something that whistleblowers got out there, and now the media has no choice but to talk about it. Now, I think that's all sort of an illusion that we've been, that's part of the propaganda rollout. And me personally, I think that's the way that most of these sort of disinformation operations work now, is they are done in a sort of a limited hangout way where it's like, oh, check out this
Hmm.
whistleblower who's a threat. The government was trying to shut him down, but now we have no choice but to cover this. But I mean, I guess I just got to say the most remarkable and most, I think, most crazy thing about this, that 60 Minutes would air this, is that this is the first time in history that I know of, at least in American culture, that all of a sudden, just on a dime, the news media is like, okay, now this is serious. Like before, it was always kooky, it was silly. It's like, let's we're going to talk about the story for you, but we're not going to say that we believe in it or anything. And now the difference in tone is like remarkably, it's very different. It's like, so
Yeah.
that to me is odd. It's not organic. I don't think just
Yeah,
because
I
some of these
agree.
news media people saw this video that supposedly of a UFO from the military, they all of a sudden were convinced. Something else is happening here. And that's sort of, I mean, I'm imagining that's part of what we're going to talk about, is like what's really
Hmm.
happening underneath this. Um, but at the same time, Whitney, like I personally do think, some of these eyewitness accounts over time are credible. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that, there's not something fishy going on or funny going on
Right.
here. It's just that there's something more to this that I think we, probably should unpack for people, because it's just
Sure.
so many facets to it.
Well, Navy pilots and their eyewitness stuff is one thing, right? But the people that are really driving this narrative and have given it quote unquote mainstream credibility have been a lot of former CIA directors recently talking about this on record, like John Brennan, James Woolsey, among
Oh wow.
others. Yeah, yeah. And actually, James Woolsey talked about it pretty recently on his book tour, where he's claiming that John F. Kennedy was killed by the Kremlin.
Yep.
And then goes on to talk about, oh, I think UFOs are credible now and all of this stuff. So it's being driven by people like that. Also, Barack Obama's come out and
That was
made
really,
claims. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that to me, once he came out and said that's kind of amps it up to a degree that, even you could have like 5 CIA directors coming out and saying it, and it
Right.
wouldn't move the needle, but Obama coming out and saying it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, well, you also have Marco Rubio, who I don't know if he still is, but he was in December when some of this stuff was going on, head of the Senate Intelligence, or acting head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And then you have Harry Reid coming out and talking about how he's believed in UFOs this whole time, but he was told not to talk about it publicly until now, which is a little odd. So, there's this consensus among the power structure that it's okay to talk about it now, and I think that's why the mainstream media is acting that way, and that's really concerning, that quote unquote conspiracy theories are only mainstream credible if the intelligence community and very obviously compromised politicians say it's okay to talk about, because obviously those forces only do that when it's in their best interest. And I think, going back to the Navy pilot point, I think, there's been a lot of pilots and stuff that have said a lot of things over the years, and a lot of it is likely credible in those cases. But I think only now they're using those to their advantage for part of this broader agenda.
100%. I mean, that's what's so fascinating about it, is what you said is really, I think, cuts through all this stuff, is that all of a sudden the public is starting to take this seriously because intelligence officials and like mainstream media have like told people it's okay, essentially,
Yeah,
psychologically
and that's
speaking.
scary
No,
that
it
they're the
is.
people that determines what's credible and what's not to the American public, just because of their track record alone. Is just scary enough. But this report that a lot of this buzz has come from recently, that's supposed to be unclassified to the public at some point, and it's going to be given to Congress and all of this stuff. It's being developed by the Pentagon, but in coordination with the office of the Director of National Intelligence, who leads the whole intelligence community. So it's the Pentagon and the intelligence community together authoring this. And I mean, anyone that thinks they're going to tell the truth about this issue, I would consider you naive. No offense. It's a little concerning to me that people would just take this whole push at face value, but it really has, apparently anyway, had an impact. 2 days ago, Newsweek reported on a survey that said 43% of Americans are now more interested in aliens after the Pentagon UFO report, because allegedly. Because of the New York Times reportings on some of these early findings from it, they left the door open about whether extraterrestrials or aliens are involved in the UFOs or not. And there's really only 2 camps that these, national security figures and politicians have left open as explanations. One is that the UFOs are extraterrestrial in origin, and the other is that the UFOs are Russia and China. It has to be one or the other, which is pretty concerning when you look at it through the lens of this is being used to push for a long-standing agenda about militarizing space.
And Whitney, I just thought of something that I think is really crucial to this. And I know this is just like a real-time pontification, but look at what's happened during the Trump era. The mainstream media's credibility plummeted down to the floor. Almost no one, other than if you're a lib, generic lib, almost no one trusts the mainstream media anymore. That Overton window, it's like it shifted so strongly during the Trump era that you have to imagine on some level that whatever this is, this UFO rollout, it's the first time that I've seen in a long time people in a bipartisan fashion getting excited and believing the mainstream media, that like, oh, the mainstream media is reporting on this must mean it's true. That's one of the first bipartisan like beliefs in that I've seen maybe since before Trump. And that to me is really interesting, because on some level, QAnon and that whole phenomenon kind of increased people's distrustingness of mainstream media. Whether, I'm not saying that was a net result, a good thing that QAnon did. I'm just saying that's what happened. And it's sort of odd that that was used as a vehicle by whoever to cause all this chaos. And it involved a lot of conspiracy theories from conspiracy culture. And it was sort of, in part designed to undermine the mainstream media. And then now here we have the mainstream media pushing out a very strong and powerful sort of conspiracy folklore mythology thing about UFOs and gaining all this power again in a weird way. So I find
Yeah.
that very psychologically interesting. And I do think that might have something to do with what we're seeing here. I totally agree with you on the Space Force stuff, but there is a psychological component to this that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, that is a really good point to raise, because it definitely has sort of brought people back into the fold of mainstream media, I think, to an extent, because it's like, oh, this is so unusual for them to report on, ergo there must be something true
Yes.
to this. I think is the effect it's having. And if you look at, what some people think to be, some of the origins of what's later spawned QAnon, like Cass Sunstein's paper on, infiltrating conspiracy movements. Well, if you're going to infiltrate conspiracy movements to make them love government instead of distrust government, you can also infiltrate the mainstream with conspiracy talking points to meet specific goals as well. So I mean, these people obviously consider that stuff, and having seen the appeal of alternative media addressing so-called forbidden truths, or in the case of QAnon, going into different topics of in conspiracy land and whatnot, the success that had in drawing people's attention. I mean, maybe they saw this as a way to, not just resuscitate mainstream media, but also, push for different agendas and have just a larger psyop on the general public. So
It could almost be seen, on whatever the meat of this actually is, whatever other purposes it serves, it can almost be seen as like a trial balloon rollout. It's like, can we get people hooked on our own version of a conspiracy narrative? And in a way they successfully have, and it's bipartisan. So that's another sort of interesting aspect to it. I mean, that's, I think, really notable, because the media is really unable to do that with almost anything else. This, in a weird way, gives them the power to do that. I'm not saying that's the complete intent behind it, but it's definitely, I mean, it does give them an incredible amount of power and new credibility in a strange way.
well, also, if the alien aspect or hostile alien aspect or the fact that a foreign adversary has really advanced technology, if that's introduced as an explanation for these things at some point, that will definitely stoke a lot of fear that the government, I think, will take advantage of for various reasons, and to get people that currently aren't falling in line to fall in line. Because how else do we combat such a massive threat as this without, the U.S. military behind us and all of this stuff? So